A rather unassuming cemetery lies just on the side of Medlock Bridge Road. A Publix and a car wash flank it, and it is sequestered into a small green space behind the innumerable storefronts that make up the area around Johns Creek High School. There are at least 100 graves in the Macedonia African Methodist Church Cemetery, and within that small green space are some of the most impactful stories that this city has to offer. One of those stories is of a man named April Waters. If you were to visit the cemetery, April Waters would be one of the first names you'd see. On that headstone reads April Waters, died October 15th, 1910, age 65 years. His gravestone is a lot like his life, shrouded in mystery, with just enough information to make you want to learn more.
We have a history, and whether it's good, whether it's bad, the whole story needs to be told. It's just like any story. You have to tell the complete story.
It was long believed that Waters' life went as follows. He was born enslaved in 1845. He was freed upon the death of his owner, George Waters, in 1852. He moved to Liberia sometime as a young adult. Then he came back to America and lived a long and fulfilling life before dying in 1910. For a long while, it was believed that April Waters was a woman, even though there is pretty clear evidence that at least some of those assumptions were wrong. There wasn't enough known about April Waters to prove anything to the contrary. And after all, how important could a person be if there were only 9 words on their headstone? Chief among them were Joan Compton of the Johns Creek Historical Society and Madyun Shahid, a U.S. Marine veteran with interest in his family's genealogy, and the founder and CEO of Hidden Voices, a nonprofit dedicated to helping other African Americans learn about their family trees.
As my job with Hidden Voices, I consider it to be a passion more so than a job. My responsibilities are to coach and help others to do the same thing that I did as far as researching my family tree, because a lot of people have questions, and I help them go and uncover all those different voices in their family tree that they want to know about.
He is also the great-great-grandson of April Waters.
My experience doing genealogy research started back in 1989. As a high school student, I had to do so many hours of volunteer work. And that volunteer work was in the library. And on the 5th floor of the Atlanta Public Library, they have a genealogy floor. And sometimes when I took breaks, I would get lost in the genealogy floor. And I went through rows of microfiche looking at different census records. And I started with the census records and also used different reference books for that particular time.
Mr. Shahid reached out to other historians and genealogists and attained a comprehensive view of April Waters' life.
The most interesting thing I found doing genealogy on my family was the will of George Waters. And he was the landowner, and in his will he mentioned my great-great-grandfather, April Waters, in the actual will.
April Waters was, in fact, not free with the death of George Waters in 1852. There is also no evidence that April Waters went to Liberia or even left the country, for that matter.
It should be exposed more. A lot of people need to know about it. I think it holds questions to history for a lot of Americans that have gaps in their history, and it helped me connect the dots.
While many of George Waters' former enslaved African Americans appear on the 1857 passenger logs for voyages to Liberia, Waters does not. And since travel to Liberia essentially ended with the liberation of enslaved African Americans after the Civil War, it is improbable that April Waters ever went to Liberia. Additionally, we know that he lived in Georgia in 1867, as he signed the Reconstruction Oath in that year. This is also how Mr. Shahid found that April Waters was a man, as only men took the Reconstruction Oath, since it was only necessary if one was an otherwise eligible voter. Although he attained freedom and emancipation, Waters was still left in poverty in the Jim Crow-era South. His tax records from 1874, 1882, and 1887 all show that he was financially poor. He owned no land and had very few assets. Records show that he was employed, but he worked a rather small farm. In 1887, the total of his property was taxed $25. After that, Waters disappeared from records entirely, and the final 23 years of his life remain a mystery. We know that he died in 1910 and was buried next to Macedonia Church. Mr. Shahid hopes that these still undiscovered parts of April Waters' life will be the impetus for even more research.
I'm not done, it's continuous. So there's a lot of different things I'm finding out every year. I usually spend a little time doing my personal family tree every year.
Slavery has been a haunting part of the American history and in our community of Johns Creek.
The impact that it will have, the restoration and preserving the legacy of the cemetery will have a good impact on Johns Creek because it shows that Johns Creek is setting the example as far as maintaining the history and telling the complete story for other cities.
April Waters' journey is still upheld today as his descendant, Mr. Shahid, with the help from the Johns Creek Historical Society, continues to research his ancestral past and the misconceptions surrounding his great-great-grandfather, April Waters.